My girlfriend cheated on me, pulled every trick in the book to win me back, and I finally ghosted her for good. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and back in April 2021, I started dating my ex, a 25-year-old woman I'll call Clara. Things moved at lightning speed right from the start. Clara would tell me how she'd prayed for someone like me, how she could already see me as her husband, her forever partner, the one she wanted to build a family with. It felt like a dream at first, but within the first month or two, cracks began to show. Whenever I brought up something that bothered me, like how something she said had hurt me, she wouldn't take it well. Instead of talking it out, she'd go straight to yelling. She'd throw out lines like, "Have you ever thought about how stressed I might be?" or shift the focus away from what I was trying to address. She'd also say things like, "People who love each other don't dwell on stuff like this. They just move on because it doesn't mean anything." This became a pattern for the entire relationship. One night stands out vividly. She fell asleep at my place but woke up at 1 a.m., furious. She yelled about having to drive home, finish laundry before work, and then accused me of making her lie down in the first place. Another time, she stayed the night but the next morning unloaded this heavy story about a former co-worker who'd stalked her for months, made inappropriate advances, and generally caused her a lot of distress. I told her I understood it must have been a tough experience for her, but that it was overwhelming to hear all of this immediately after waking up. She didn't take it well. She got angry, accused me of not caring, and shouted things like, "What the hell are you looking at? Can I help you?" As things went on, I started noticing other issues. Her boss would randomly text her late at night, sometimes at 11 p.m. or midnight, while he was drinking. I thought it was inappropriate and disrespectful. When I brought it up, she admitted it made her uncomfortable too, but she didn't want to stir the pot at work. She explained that people who don't fit in at her job tend to get fired. She promised to set boundaries and keep the conversations strictly work-related, but nothing really changed. About a month later, the same issue came up again, and we ended up fighting over it. She told me she kept her replies short and unengaging to end the conversations quickly. But when I suggested she ask her boss not to text her at all outside work hours, she refused. She said she didn't want to risk her chances of getting promoted. Eventually, we talked it through, and she showed me their messages. That's when I discovered they weren't just quick exchanges. They were long, personal conversations about their relationships, family problems, and other personal stuff. She'd even sent him pictures of herself and her younger sister trying on prom dresses. She admitted she knew the context of their chats wasn't appropriate and apologized for not being upfront with me. Around the same time, I also saw a text from another coworker she'd given her number to. He was blatantly flirting, saying stuff like, "I always knew you thought I was good-looking." She apologized again, claiming she'd forgotten about the text and told him I wasn't okay with those kinds of conversations. The coworker apologized, but as far as I knew, she never addressed anything with her boss. Then there was her ex-boyfriend. He reached out to her one day to tell her he'd had a wild dream about her. When I asked what he meant by wild, she was defensive, but I encouraged her to ask him. Turns out, he'd dreamed they slept together. I told her it wasn't the dream itself that bothered me, it's not like anyone controls their dreams, but the fact that he went out of his way to tell her about it, knowing he had a girlfriend. That felt weird to me. She got upset and said I'd never understand their bond because he'd been there for her during some of the hardest times in her life. Every time I brought up concerns like this, she'd flip it around, saying something like, "We were having a good night, and now you've ruined it." It always felt like my feelings were dismissed, and the blame was put on me instead of addressing behaviors that didn't align with a healthy, committed relationship. She also mentioned several times that she'd always shared her location with her exes. I'd never done that, not because I was against it, but no one had ever asked me to. One day, after she told me about a close call she'd had with a traffic accident, I suggested we share locations. I said, "If something happens, I want to be able to get to you right away." She agreed, and we shared our locations for a while. But it didn't take long for things to feel off. One morning around 10 a.m., I checked her location. Normally, she worked 9 to 5, while I worked 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. The night before, she'd gone quiet over text pretty early, so I was curious. Her location wasn't showing up. Later, when I brought it up, she acted like it was some kind of glitch. I tried it again, and her location reappeared. My gut told me she'd turned it off intentionally, but I pushed the thought aside and chose to trust her. A few days later, I apologized for assuming the worst. I explained that I had trust issues stemming from my last relationship, where I was repeatedly lied to and cheated on, and I was actively working on overcoming that. I told her I believed her. Around May 2021, Clara started dealing with some big life changes. She found out she couldn't stay at her current house because of family problems. On top of that, her grandmother was unwell, and other family matters piled up. I tried to be her sounding board, someone she could vent to and lean on during all of this. At one point, I suggested we move in together. I thought it might help ease the stress she was under and give her a sense of stability, something she really seemed to need. By September 2021, we found a place and made the move. But before that, I'll admit I let my paranoia get the better of me. Between the dishonesty and constant conflict, I reached a breaking point and went through her phone. Now, I'm not proud of that. It's not okay, and I'm fully aware of that. But at the time, I felt like I didn't know what else to do. What I found, though, shook me to my core. There were videos and pictures of her being intimate with another man. There were also nude photos of her with another woman, she's bisexual, and, to my surprise, videos we had made together were mixed in there too. When I confronted her, I framed it as a concern. I asked her if she still had media from previous relationships. She downplayed it, saying, "I think I have one video. I just haven't looked in my hidden photos for a long time." That response didn't sit right with me, especially since she'd referenced re-watching the videos we made. Later, she checked her phone and told me, "Okay, I found it." It was just one video, and I deleted it. But I knew she was lying. So I admitted I had gone through her phone. She immediately blew up at me, yelling about how I invaded her privacy. I stayed calm and told her I wasn't proud of what I did but that I couldn't ignore what I found. When I asked her about the photos with the other woman, she admitted she kept them. "No, I like them," she said. "I'm the only one who has them." I didn't even know how to respond to that. Why would someone in a committed relationship want to hold on to intimate media from the past? Since we were already on the topic of honesty, I brought up the issue of her turning off her location. I asked her again if she had done it on purpose. At first, she denied it, but when I pressed her and told her not to lie to me, she laughed. Then, she admitted she did turn it off. Her excuse? "I didn't want you to get upset that I was late to work that day." When I asked why she would even think I'd be upset, she had no real answer. "It was a stupid thing to do," she said, apologizing. She eventually deleted the old media from her phone and apologized for lying about the location sharing, but by then, trust felt like it was in short supply. We moved in together in September 2021, and by February 2022, it was clear that things were far from stable. We had small fights over little annoyances and big fights over serious issues. One of the worst happened late one night in October or November. She said something cruel to me, I can't even remember exactly what it was now, but it stung. When I told her how hurt I was by her words, she just shrugged it off. "Oh, I don't give a fuck. I've been drinking. I was gonna have a good night, and I don't give a shit." Hearing her say that broke something in me. I couldn't understand how someone I cared so much about could treat my feelings like they didn't matter. Especially since, for her, I'd always drop everything I was doing to listen, to comfort her, to fix whatever was wrong. If she had a concern, my first response was always, "Okay, how can I fix this?" And I'd do it. But here I was, getting nothing but indifference in return. I snapped. I slid a lit candle across the dresser, and the wax spilled everywhere. Then I grabbed my Apple dock charger, ripped it out of the wall, and threw it on the ground. I didn't even know what I was trying to accomplish, I just felt so overwhelmed and powerless. She jumped out of bed, yelling at me, and shoved me hard against the dresser. Then she hit me in the chest and grabbed a knife to scrape the wax off the dresser. At one point, she pointed the knife at my face while yelling. We argued for hours. I tried to tell her how disrespected and unvalued I felt in the relationship. But instead of hearing me out, she fired back with personal attacks. Eventually, I gave up and went to sleep in a separate room. The next day, we talked, but it didn't lead to much resolution. She brought up the fact that I'd wanted to hit her back during the fight. "That says enough about our relationship," she told me. I couldn't believe it. She completely ignored the fact that she had shoved and hit me first, and she'd even pointed a knife at me. Around this time, Clara would often go out with her friend, Ruby. I noticed a pattern with Ruby. Whenever they went out, Ruby would hook up with random men at bars or exchange numbers with them, despite being in a 4-year relationship with her boyfriend, L. On a work trip, Ruby even tried to hook up with one of her co-workers. I told Clara I thought Ruby's behavior was not only wrong but also made me uncomfortable, especially since Ruby confided in Clara about everything. One night, Clara went out with Ruby and said she'd be home by 1:30 a.m. But when I left for work at 4:30 a.m., she still wasn't home. Later, we talked about it, and I told her how disrespectful I thought it was to stay out so late without communicating. I also pointed out that she seemed to struggle with setting boundaries, not just with Ruby but with other people as well. For example, there was a woman Clara had been intimate with before, Elise, who started a group chat with Clara and another friend, H. One day, Elise sent nude photos of herself to the chat, asking for compliments to make her feel better. H followed suit, sending her own nudes. Clara told me she thought the group chat was weird and that she hadn't sent anything. She even teased H about sharing the photos. But later, at a group dinner, H accidentally let it slip that Clara had sent a topless photo of herself, using her hand to cover her chest. Clara was furious with H for spilling the truth but told me it shouldn't matter because nothing inappropriate happened. Another incident involved a concert we attended together with her friend Kay. Clara and Kay had a history of going to shows and hooking up with guys in bands. One of the bands that night had a frontman Clara had previously exchanged flirty DMs with. I told her I wasn't comfortable with her going backstage, especially given her history with him. But during the show, she and Kay disappeared for over 30 minutes. I eventually found them at a bar upstairs. Kay tried to cover for Clara, saying she had dragged her backstage to look for cocaine. Later, I found out the frontman had messaged Clara earlier that day, asking if he'd get to see her that night. By December, things weren't any better. Clara had gone through my phone multiple times during our relationship, logging into my Instagram and Facebook accounts, but she never found anything incriminating. The one time a female friend of mine sent a text, Clara made it known she wasn't comfortable, so I cut off contact immediately, no questions asked. The texts were harmless, just small talk, but I wanted to respect her feelings. It stung knowing she didn't hold herself to the same standard. After everything that had happened, I was still trying to make sense of it all. I even found myself agreeing with Clara when she raised concerns about a female friend of mine texting me. I immediately cut off contact, understanding her discomfort. Looking back, I realize I was always willing to meet her halfway, even when it felt like I was the only one doing so. One night, we went out downtown with her brother and aunt, hopping between a few bars. By the time we got home, Clara was completely hammered. She could barely walk, so I carried her inside, brought her some water, and let her sleep it off. But as I sat there, the uneasiness I'd been carrying around wouldn't go away. Against my better judgment, I checked her phone again. I know it wasn't the right thing to do, and I hated that I felt driven to it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. What I found hit me like a freight train. There was a long string of text messages between Clara and someone named A, dating back to August and continuing right up to that night. Over the months, their texts painted a vivid, damning picture, a coming over to Clara's house and staying the night, conversations about how crazy their nights together had been and how good it felt, reassurances from Clara that she'd never treat her the way she was treating me. They even talked about where their relationship was headed. I would visit Clara at work, call her on the way home, and they'd make plans like going out on A's boat during a weekday when I'd be at work and Clara would have the day off. And it wasn't just anyone. A was one of Clara's managers at work, and she was married to another woman, S, who was also a manager there. I confronted Clara about it in the middle of the night. She panicked. Her response wasn't remorse or explanation, it was to shove me into the wall multiple times. When she finally calmed down, she launched into a 3-hour story about how I wasn't a US citizen and how she confided in Clara about her terrible marriage with S. Clara claimed that I hated taking care of S's child and insisted their relationship was different because they were both women. She even went so far as to say there were no moving parts, as if that made it better. By the time we'd both completely exhausted ourselves, we fell into bed, though nothing was resolved. The next day, I still couldn't shake the betrayal. I decided to message S on Facebook, showing her the texts and letting her know her wife was cheating with my girlfriend. S responded, saying the name matched but the phone number didn't. That's when I confronted Clara again. After hours of back and forth, she admitted the truth. It wasn't a she'd been texting, it was a guy named W. W was someone she'd been sleeping with right before we got together. She tried to downplay it, claiming they only drank wine, smoked, and made out in a hot tub. I didn't believe her for a second. Then she hit me with another revelation. She admitted she'd cheated in every single relationship she'd ever been in. She told me W was the biggest mistake of her life, but her reasoning was twisted. She said she pursued him because he came from a wealthy family, he was easy to control since he never questioned her, and this part still makes my stomach turn. If she ever ended up pregnant by him, his family would take care of everything for her, and she wouldn't have to work. Despite all of this, I decided to give our relationship one last shot. It was Christmas Eve, and I didn't want to throw everything away without trying to make it work. For about a week, things seemed better. Clara answered my questions and made an effort to reassure me. But it didn't last long. She soon started to shut me down, saying things like, "You're going to have to stop asking questions if you ever want to get over this." It was like she expected me to move on instantly, even though we'd agreed it could take a long time, longer than our relationship had even lasted, to rebuild trust. Then, not long after, Clara was fired from her job. The owner let her go after finding out she'd dragged A and S into her mess and tried to use them as scapegoats. Instead of taking accountability, she blamed me, saying I should feel responsible and even remorseful for her losing her job. From there, things spiraled further. I told her I wasn't comfortable with her going out alone anymore, given the circumstances. I also told her that privacy on her end was essentially non-existent now. Her family jumped in, calling me controlling and narcissistic. They completely ignored the fact that she'd been having an affair and instead said things like, "A woman can look through your phone because we get paranoid, it's different." Clara, meanwhile, refused to take accountability. She started diving into online forums about twin flames and convinced herself that our relationship struggles were because I was running from her, not because of her cheating. By February, I'd reached my breaking point. One evening, we were in the computer room, and Clara was on her laptop. Out of nowhere, she said, "I wish I could show you these pictures I took of H, but I can't because she's naked." I froze. "Why did you take naked pictures of H? Why wouldn't you talk to me about this first?" She acted like it was no big deal. "I told you I was going to take pictures of her today." I stared at her. "Yeah, but you didn't tell me they'd be naked. I'm really not comfortable with this. I don't know why you wouldn't mention it." She got defensive. "I don't think it's okay that you're uncomfortable with it," she said. Then she dropped the bomb. She was planning to take more pictures of H in a few days for her OnlyFans account. That was it for me. I snapped. I told her I was done and started packing my things. But Clara wasn't having it. She blocked doorways, refused to let me into the rooms with my belongings, and even unpacked boxes I'd already filled. The argument escalated into a level I never thought we'd reach. We hurled personal attacks at each other, something I'd never done before. But by that point, I was completely drained. The lack of respect, care, and accountability had left me with nothing. As I was packing to leave, Clara left the house for a short time, only to come back and block me in with her car. She told me, "You can't leave. I parked behind you, you're not going anywhere." It felt like yet another desperate attempt to control the situation. Eventually, she moved her car after I told her my family was on their way to help me load up my things. I left that day. But even after I walked out of that house, Clara and I stayed in contact. We tried to work through everything from a distance, though I think deep down, I knew it wasn't going to work. By mid-March, I finally broke things off for good. The utilities for the house were all in my name, along with the silverware, dishes, washer and dryer, and TV I'd left behind for her to use. I told her I needed to get those things in a couple of weeks. I'd also been covering all the utilities since December, and I explained that I'd need to cancel them so she could transfer the accounts to her name. She wasn't happy about any of this. She changed the locks on the house and locked me out of the utility accounts by changing the login information. I managed to cancel the utilities directly by calling the providers, but the entire ordeal left me drained. When the day came to collect my belongings, Clara said she'd put them in the garage for me. When I arrived, some things were still in the house, and to make matters worse, she'd installed a camera in the garage to monitor me. I had to return another day to get the rest of my things. Looking back, I think my grief started the moment I found out about the cheating. At first, I was in denial, convincing myself things could be salvaged. When I left the house, anger took over, especially when I had to fight for my own things or cancel utilities. After that, depression settled in, and I hit rock bottom. In a moment of weakness, I reached out to Clara and asked her to come over. I was a complete wreck, bawling my eyes out for 2 hours while venting about how much I trusted her. Somewhere in my head, I thought maybe I could bargain my way to closure. I even asked her if she'd been with anyone else since we broke up. She told me a girl at her new bar job followed her into the bathroom, pushed her against a stall, made out with her, and put her hand down her pants. That statement sent my mind into a spiral. I didn't believe it wasn't prompted by Clara, and if it wasn't, then it was something far more disturbing. Either way, it left me feeling even worse. I also asked about W again. She initially lied, saying he'd approached her at the gym recently just to say hi. That didn't make sense to me. I'd told W about their affair in December, and he immediately blocked both of us. I also made Clara block him, so there was no reason for them to be in contact. When I pushed her on it, she admitted she'd unblocked him on Instagram and they'd had a long conversation in the gym parking lot. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would she unblock someone she'd called the biggest mistake of her life? Her response? Why not? It was like she was so detached from accountability, from basic respect. Even after all this, she told me she wanted no one else but me. She claimed she would do anything to be better for me. But her actions told a completely different story. We stayed in touch for a couple more weeks. On April 14th, the Thursday before Easter Sunday, I went over to her place. We made dinner, stayed up talking, had sex, and she called me all the same pet names she used to. She told me she loved me, and for a moment, I let myself believe her. I left the next morning, and she went to work that night. Saturday night, she worked a double shift and asked me to check that she got home safely. I was working a case that night as part of my night shift as a Leo in the same city, so I told her I couldn't. On Sunday, while on a break during my shift, I drove by her house to say hi. That's when I saw it, a truck parked in her driveway, lights off in the house except for her bedroom's LED lights. My heart sank. I texted and called her, but she didn't respond. Toward the end of my shift, I drove by again. The truck was still there, and it was clear whoever was driving it had stayed the night. I was devastated. For the second time, I felt like I'd been shattered. Later, I left her a voicemail, telling her how much she'd hurt me and to never contact me again unless it was to take responsibility for what she'd done. The next day, she texted me at 8 p.m., flipping everything back on me. She told me I didn't love her, we weren't together anyway so I shouldn't care, and that I was the one who left because she cheated? She ended with, "I don't care what you say anymore." I told her to fuck off and blocked her. I'm writing all this down because I don't want to forget it. I need to remember everything she did to hurt me so I can recognize these signs in the future. I need to hold people accountable and stop giving them chance after chance. The hardest part is how I still feel. I miss her, even though I know it's trauma bonding or just familiarity. I still want to reach out, even though I know it's the worst thing I could do. I've lost my appetite, lost interest in everything I used to care about, and I can barely focus on anything. I wonder what she's doing, if she's thinking about me, if I did something wrong. But if I'm honest with myself, I did everything I could for her. I listened. I supported her when she needed it. I sold and traded vehicles to get us a better commuter car for road trips, one I made sure was manual and turboed because she was a car girl growing up. I chased down someone who stole her phone on a vacation trip and kept her safe while doing it. I chose her because I thought we were building a life together. It's impossible to forget someone who told you that you were their end goal, their husband, the father of their future kids. Someone who painted a picture of forever and then lied to you, cheated, and blamed it all on you. Someone who had the audacity to say, "You made it, you got the job, the truck, and now you're leaving me," when all I ever wanted was to build a life together. I want to see a therapist, but my insurance doesn't kick in until July, and I can't afford to pay out of pocket right now. I feel hurt and lost. One friend has been incredibly supportive, and I don't know how I'd have survived without him. But even with his help, I get so down on myself. One last thing, after I left and blocked her, she started making anonymous Instagram accounts to view my page. When we talked before Easter, I brought it up. She just laughed and said, "I don't even know why you bother blocking them. Do you have any idea how many emails I have? I'm just going to make more." She added, "Though I can't keep watching your stories, that's easier for you to find." And that's the woman I wasted so much of myself on.